Greetings from the Carroll County line. I'm your host tonight. I'd introduce myself, but if you don't recognize me, we're probably better off. If you know me or know anything about me, I'm sure you're probably looking for something else to do right now, and who could blame you? I certainly can't speak for all my neighbors out here, but Teresa, my lovely and long-suffering wife, and I have lived here for more than 25 years. People have come and gone in that span of time, but by and large, things have remained pretty much unchanged. We don't get too excited about much. A couple of weeks ago, somebody called and wanted to sell us high-speed fiber optic internet service. It really sounded like a good deal, but then there was a condition. In order to be eligible, we had to find 10 neighbors within a 2-mile radius who also wanted to subscribe. With some quick math, I discovered, and not that it came as any surprise, we don't even have 10 neighbors who live within 2 miles. If you were to visit out here on a nice warm day in June when the breeze ripples across the rows of new corn like a gentle wave, and the neighbor isn't aerating his manure lagoon, you might fall in love with this neighborhood. It's pretty peaceful a good part of the time. Probably because there's very little reason for anybody to come out this far. A dozen miles from Kokomo, it takes us 23 minutes to get to church, and nearly an hour to get out to Plevna on the opposite side of Howard County. Teresa and I love our little place in the country, but after more than a quarter century, we've concluded that it's not a life for everybody. Rural lifestyles can attract mostly farmers who, of course, make a living out here, fake farmers like us, investors hoping to flip some run-down, ramshackle old farmstead, and people who just want to be left alone. The latter group includes meth cooks, people who raise sheep, marijuana dealers, along with your random, mostly ordinary folks who simply don't care to be bothered. Our nearest town is Carrollton. There are still some signs out along the old Michigan Road where the community at one time had their own post office and school. The town started its tragic spiral into extinction in 1837 when they closed the post office. School lasted a lot longer. Logansport's almost famous Kitchell brothers used to practice basketball in the gym. Occasionally you'll see Angela Buckman refer to Carrollton on our weather map during tornado season, but you won't find it anyplace else. True to our Hoosier heritage, this neighborhood is about as rich as it can be in Indiana basketball history. Hall of Famer Joe Platt grew up in nearby Young America, and as a teenager is reputed to have spent hours tossing a ball against the side of a barn down the road from here. He started coaching while he was in the Navy, and after World War II became a teacher and basketball coach in Kokomo. In 1961, his Kokomo Wildcats won the state championship. Carrollton residents are eligible to receive a library card in nearby Burlington. Burlington still has its post office, a liquor store, and 3 restaurants. 2 of those serve as taverns, while the third is a very nice coffee shop. The community has 4 Protestant churches, a community park, and a cemetery. We used to have an IGA grocery, but it closed a long time ago and was replaced, of course, by a Dollar General store. The former Scoops, once famous for its conies, is now under new management and has rebranded as the Snow Biz. Name's a little suspicious if you ask me, since they're closed all winter. Somebody should probably investigate. Burlington hosts an annual fall festival in the park on the east side of town, just off State Road 22. There's a tractor parade on Saturday afternoon that stretches out for a mile behind the fire truck, with sirens wailing and their red lights flashing. It's a glorious mess while the town marshal and his deputy shut down 2 state highways until the last Moline tractors cleared the intersection. There's usually a fish fry sometime over the weekend. which always seems to compete with the Young America Lions Club dinner around the corner. Burlington gets to close State Road 29 for the tractor parade, while hours later, the Lions Club will set up in the middle of State Road 18. Nobody seems to mind the inconvenience, if there is any. There's something about living in a small town that encourages anonymity. We don't often make a big deal out of people one way or another. So everybody was surprised last year when Burlington honored a hometown hero that nobody had ever heard of before. Don Mills had grown up in poverty and was raised by a single mother. Family moved around in Burlington, where Donnie, along with his twin brother Ronnie, developed ruinous reputations as town troublemakers. Nobody much cared for the Mills brothers. Maybe looking to get rid of them one afternoon, somebody drove the twins out to the American Legion baseball field. Ronnie and Donnie became part of a team where, probably for the first time in their lives, they learned something about discipline and rules and loyalty. Maybe for the first time in their lives, they found a positive male role model who was more interested in building character in the boys rather than just winning games. After high school, Don was pretty much just waiting around to be drafted in the Army because, as Steve Earle has insisted, they always took the white trash first. During Army boot camp, Don was singled out for the chance to train as an Army aviator. When he learned that it'd take a full year for the Army to teach him how to fly a helicopter, he jumped at the chance. Flying would keep him out of the infantry in Vietnam. His hitch was only 2 years, and he hoped the war would be over before anybody trusted him alone in a cockpit. But he was wrong. By June 1970, he was flying with the 174th Aviation Battalion, Americal Division, based in the South Central Coastal region of South Vietnam. Air crews were continuing to provide support for the U.S. Army's 11th Light Infantry Brigade. Their mission was to locate and destroy enemy base camps and supply routes along the infamous Ho Chi Minh Trail. On June 22nd, Don was assigned to fly a command and control mission over ground fighting operations when he overheard a desperate call for help from a nearby infantry unit. Fierce fighting had broken out, and seriously wounded soldiers needed immediate medical evacuation. As aircraft commander, Don requested permission from his superiors to fly in and pick up the wounded soldiers. His request was denied. Higher command judged that trying to land a helicopter in the middle of that firefight was simply suicidal. Don ignored the order. Flying directly into the battle, he hovered over the landing zone, using his aircraft as a shield to protect the evacuation efforts. His door gunner returned fire into the persistent enemy as the wounded were loaded aboard for transport. His aircraft sustained significant battle damage from small arms and machine gun fire, but miraculously, Don's 4-man crew and an observer came through without so much as a scratch. Don and his co-pilot were able to nurse the crippled aircraft and their bleeding cargo back to the base camp. He wouldn't be so fortunate during the rest of his tour. Logging more than 1,000 combat hours, Don crashed 3 helicopters and his co-pilot was killed. By the time he returned to civilian life, he'd been awarded the Army Commendation Medal, the Bronze Star, and no less than 23 air medals, with 1 presented for valor during the daring rescue in June. But most importantly, some brave soldiers came home alive. After his discharge from the military, Don continued in service and joined the Kokomo Police, dedicating his life to public safety. He built a reputation as a persistent and intuitive detective. Later in his career, he demonstrated inspirational leadership as a patrol watch commander. He died in 2019 at age 70. Don considered his family his greatest accomplishment and blessing. His daughter, Major Virginia Clark, a West Point graduate assigned to the 3rd Infantry Regiment at Arlington, said, "Though my father had no one to teach him, he taught his children about respect, patriotism, and love. And I'll be forever grateful for for my father's ability to grow past his upbringing and give to us the childhood I wish he could have had. The Carroll County Commissioners and the Indiana General Assembly, considering a bill introduced 2 years ago by Representatives Mike Karakoff and Heath Van Adder, have honored the service of Donald Mills by dedicating the bridge north of Burlington on State Road 29 in his name. Major Clark said, "Even though I now live in our nation's capital, I don't believe any spot in our great country is more American than our small communities. The act of naming a bridge so close to your town in honor of my father not only supports veterans, but I think it shows that this community encourages those who conquer challenging circumstances to leave the world better than when they arrived. I hope that when people drive across that bridge, they'll be reminded that communities like Burlington produce men and women who overcome obstacles and live to improve our world." It was a big day in Burlington as military and civilian dignitaries, law enforcement officials, and Mills family members gathered around the veteran statue in Community Park. I knew Don Mills. He was a reluctant hero and would have been embarrassed by all the fanfare. But his name, his devotion, will not be forgotten. People who drive across that bridge may not have any idea who Chief Warrant Officer Donald Mills was, but they'll have to appreciate that the people of Burlington do, and that they will not forget him. The town hasn't forgotten another hero. John Barber influenced the lives of a lot of children in his 22 years of teaching. Like most young men of his generation, John joined the Army after high school and fought the Nazis across Europe. Wounded in combat, he returned home with the Purple Heart and Bronze Star. After completing a degree from IU, John came back to Burlington, where he taught in the local high school for 11 years. He retired from Northwestern schools in 1984. And then there's David Foster, the pioneer liquor salesman who founded the city of Kokomo, settled first in Burlington in 1834. That was 10 years before he contributed several parcels of land along the Wildcat Creek so that what would become known as Howard County could have a seat of government. Mills, Barber, Foster, Bronson were just a few of the extraordinary people from Burlington's past. There's nothing extraordinary about Teresa and I. We'd lived out here in relative obscurity for maybe 10 years before anybody seemed to notice. Finally, there was old Max, a farmer, widowed and semi-retired. Having turned his operation over to his son-in-law, Max kept busy by keeping track of his neighbors. Max and I found ourselves in our own company a lot of evenings. His wife was dead and mine was working. Eventually, we started going into Burlington for dinner about once every other week. Having lived here all his life, Max knew everybody, and it wasn't long before we were invited to join some people at a bigger table. And then that table got bigger. And eventually members of our party on Wednesday night could only find seats at the bar where they'd have to turn around to be part of any conversation. That's how Teresa and I, at last, became part of this wonderfully small and interesting community. Our dinner table held regular seats for people from every imaginable walk of life. We had a couple of farmers, a well driller, a physician, retired soldier, software engineer, and a postman. Most of them have lived around here their whole lives and would never think of going anyplace else. At least on Wednesday nights, they all presumably had enough money in their pockets for dinner. If they didn't, somebody'd spot them. With a pint in front of them and somewhat interesting friends on all sides, who could want for anything else? That small group of core diners grew so fond of one another that we were spending 2 and sometimes 3 evenings together. Wasn't always a meal. A lot of evenings we'd rally in somebody's shop or porch, enjoy a few beers, and discuss nothing of any particular importance. Not that there weren't important things happening around us. There were a few smokers in our group who had some ideas about Kokomo's smoking ban. We celebrated when the last of our American combat troops were finally pulled out of Iraq. and when Angela Buckman came back to do the weather on WTHR. We mourned over the rising level of gun violence and school shootings in America and laughed all through the Anthony Weiner scandal. And then we all went to our respective homes, ate dinner, and slept like babies. Most of us, I happen to know, take a few minutes at the end of every day to express gratitude for this Hoosier heartland. Tucked away here in the middle of America, we've managed to isolate ourselves from the chaos and drama which seems to have divided our world. In Indiana, we pay more attention to our neighbors than we do to Washington, and for that reason, we're not easily frightened or angered easily by news that the sky's falling. It's not so much that we've got our heads in the sand. We try to keep up with current events as much as anybody, and in discussion we sometimes disagree. You're bound to have that unless everybody at the table is a complete idiot. But in the end, we always seem to agree on one thing: that peace among us is more important than being right. Yep, it's pretty peaceful out here, and we aim to keep it that way.